You screwed it all up. You screwed up my mother. You screwed me up. You got me so mad. Drove me crazy. I want my cake, Bedelia! No! No! No!
Where's my cake, Bedelia? I want my cake. It's Father's Day, Bedelia. I want my cake.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power.
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is the fear of God. Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Fear of God podcast. We are hopefully your favorite podcast. I know we're our favorite podcast. I don't know if all my grammar works there, but it works in my head. Here at the Fear of God, we find the holy and the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear. We dissect what scares us in order to find what saves us. Welcome, friends. We are glad you're here. Talking to you right now is one of your co-hosts, Nathan Rouse. Now, typically with me is fellow co-host, just amazing guy, fellow Avenger, Reed Lackey. He did say something, he was here a second ago, but he said something about wanting his cake. I love cake. So I'm really hoping that he brings enough to share. The way he said it, though, frankly, was a little ominous. But if he is going to retrieve some cake for himself, I hope that he does, in fact, bring some for the rest of us while he is, tending to said confection. I did want to encourage you, if you've never done it before, we work hard to bring you these episodes on a pretty much weekly basis at this point. With the occasional month off, only 1 month in 2.5 years. Okay. And even during that month, we worked really hard and gave you really amazing new art from Jacob Hunt. Look, I'm just making this all a big circle plug here. And what I would love is if you're new to the show, if you're old to the show, if you're somewhere in the middle and have not gone and written a review or posted a rating on iTunes, it would really mean a lot if you did that. Because if you follow us on Instagram, you'll notice that we are posting those up as part of our Throwback Thursday Instagram posts as well. So not only will you do us a glorious favor by posting your glowing thoughts, or even your, not so glowing thoughts, maybe those will get broadcast as well. But not only will you do us that favor, we'll then, elevate you a little and boost you a little and say, look at this nice person leaving this wonderful... Reed! Hello. You are, covered in icing. What in the world?
Wow. I have no comeback for that. I have nothing that I can say to pivot out of that. You just be thankful, you be grateful that I didn't open the episode, because had I opened the episode, Nathan Rouse, you, sir, would have had a bug problem. I guarantee you would have had a bug problem.
I've got a bug problem.
It's this movie.
I'm sure we'll get there.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. Sorry, you asked me that right in mid-yawn. So, no, hey, buddy. I'm fully present.
Awesome.
How are you doing?
Alert.
Did you enjoy your cake? Did you bring?
Yep.
You bring enough
Nope.
for everybody?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Oh. Well, that
See, the
sounds
thing
right.
is, I'm even worse because I'm not that big of a dessert lover. Like, I'm not a big sweets eater, as it were. Like, I'm a big soda drinker, but I'm not a big sweets eater. My preferred dessert, in air quotes, is like chips and salsa. That's my favorite.
So, but like, if you were to go to a restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
like tonight, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
a restaurant of your choosing, and it's like, you're not worrying about pinching pennies or whatever, and like were to order a dessert after dinner, what might you get? Or would you just totally abstain?
If I didn't totally abstain, I would order some version of ice cream or some version of like a sherbet yogurt thing. No, I don't.
A sherbet yogurt thing?
Yeah, something.
Do they even make a sherbet yogurt?
No, they don't. But like sherbet or yogurt thing. But yeah.
Like a parfait?
No, I don't like parfait. I don't like
parfait's yogurt.
I don't like quiches. I don't like. Well, yeah, but parfaits
What?
have got stuff
A
in
quiche? A quiche is not anything dessert or dairy related at all.
It shows you how little I know about desserts. I actually do not know.
Well, a quiche is not a dessert. It's not in the dessert family.
Okay, it's not. I don't know what it is. I don't know what that is.
A quiche is like
It's like a pastry, right? It's like a.
No, I would not categorize quiche as a pastry. It's like an egg-based pie. It's like a.
You just said pie
for
and told me it's
instance,
not in the dessert.
Well, no. It uses like a pie crust and a pie tin, but it's not like a pie. Like you serve it in some sort of dessert fashion. I mean, my wife makes quiche, and it's like got spinach and
Ugh, that does not sound like dessert.
It's not a dessert. You're the one who said it is a dessert.
Yeah,
I'm just clarifying
but I'm
for
just
the record.
going on the basis of like you said,
but
like
you want your yogurt, and I said parfait, and you're like, no. And I'm like, but that is yogurt is parfait.
Okay, but it was just. I mean, I've been to Yogurtland a few times. I've never had a parfait.
What? Is there a place called Yogurtland?
There is a place called Yogurtland. that is the thing. Yes.
I love that this asinine trip down just dessert way yielded that there's an actual place called Yogurtland. I thought you were just BSing.
No. There is a place. There's a chain called Yogurtland, but no.
Yeah, but you're talking about frozen yogurt.
But yeah.
Okay. When you said yogurt initially, I'm like, oh, like Greek yogurt. Like
yogurt. That would be parfait. No, that makes sense. No,
right.
my concept for yogurt is like, frozen yogurt. And no, like, listeners, I did not know what a quiche was before here, but yeah, it was really like
he's self-conscious.
Well, it's true, but I'm sitting here. You're like, no, it's not a dessert, but like, no, it's like a pie with like a pie tin, and I'm like,
good try.
But seriously, I'm like,
no,
like,
but you pivoted from yogurt to quiche. Those are not related things.
It's true.
It's like, hey, how was your salad? Oh, it wasn't so good. The pizza was great though. It's like, well, how did we get from that thing to that thing?
Oh my gosh, Can you imagine a pizza salad? Good Lord, that would be great. We got to get to this episode.
I was just trying to figure out what you liked in the dessert family.
That's true. Well, clearly
you're like not quiche. Like, well, right. I mean.
what's your favorite fruit?
What's your favorite soda, Reed? Well, not coffee. Like,
yeah, I know, right?
Okay.
It was like, what kind of fruit and vegetables do you eat? No, I like chocolate noodles. I don't know.
Clearly food knowledge is not you are. See, I can say this because you are so brilliant in so many facets and columns of life.
But not food.
It's occasionally kind of refreshing to stumble into a field of conversation where you're like, I don't know anything. That's like
man does not know a thing about food.
That's a little fun, actually.
Yeah. Well, glad I could help.
Anyway, yeah.
So yeah.
So we've.
What you watching?
What you eating?
What you listening to?
You know what you eating? What you got, buddy?
Oh man. Well, so I am very excited because it's been like a year, I think a full year. But YouTube, well, okay, this is important. You have to pay for the subscription. Like, it's not that it'll just give it to you. But YouTube has finally dropped the second season of strike first, strike hard, no mercy. That is, yes, indeed, Cobra Kai Season 2 has hit YouTube Premium. As of this recording, my wife and I are only through the first 4 episodes, but as of...
Of how many?
10. But we literally only watched it like one night. And so as of the airing of this episode, I'm sure we will be well past, the full season and everything. So far, the first 4 episodes are great. It's just, I mean, if you are...
Are they 30 minutes? Are they 45 minutes? Are they an hour?
They're 30-ish minutes, so like 32. It was funny because they are as many as they, I guess, need to be for that story. Because like I think the first episode is 35 minutes, but like episode 3 is only like 24 minutes. So they're all around that half-hour mark, very easily bingeable. I do feel like if there is a detriment to the show at all, and I don't consider this a detriment, if there's a detriment to the show at all, it does depend on your knowledge of, at the very least, the first Karate Kid, a lot of at least some key moments from the second Karate Kid. So if you have not seen those films, or if those films don't have the sort of nostalgic affection for you, then...
What about, does the next Karate Kid factor in?
No, not at all. Not at all.
No,
not remotely.
Isn't Steven Seagal in that movie?
I don't think so. I think it's Pat Morita.
Some Steven Seagal knockoff. There's like a
really?
Yeah, because it's like the competitor, instructor that's like wooing her towards more violent means of karate.
Oh my gosh! See, I'm gonna have to look this up because if Steven Seagal's in that movie,
but I got to be honest, I've seen that once.
Oh, okay.
30 years ago or whenever it was. So I'm really, I might be just pulling, just I don't know, crane kicking that one out of my butt. I don't know.
Okay, all right.
But yeah. So
Cobra Kai.
So no Hilary Swank in Cobra Kai.
Nope, not at all. At least not by episode 4. Nope, not at all.
She is in $1 Million Baby though.
Yeah, she is. Don't spoil it.
Too late. All right, so Cobra Kai.
Yes, Cobra Kai. That is my watching. If I will say this because I think I kind of dropped the ball on it.
You did.
If it requires knowledge of the Karate Kid films. If you know and like the Karate Kid films at all, Cobra Kai is so tremendously worth your time. If you are fond of those movies and have not checked it out, go seek it out. Pay your money for the 1 month or do the 1 month free trial of YouTube Premium to see all the episodes because it is well worth it. It's fantastic. They're great. They're better than they have any right to be. They're wonderful.
Awesome. I can dig that.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky son. So I did want to revisit like we did last week, if I may interject here. We have posed to listeners what are they watching, reading, listening to, and apparently we are adding eating to that category too. So feel free to
not quiche.
Feel free. In my house, we do actually eat quiche occasionally, but apparently not in the Lucky house. So I did want to throw out real quick. Mr. Matt Murray alerted us that he just watched The Tennessee Kid, which is a comedy special. Have you heard of this?
No. I heard about it from Matt Murray's recommendation.
All right. Well, there you go, Matt. From your viewing pleasure to Facebook to the podcast, here we are. A comedy special with I don't even know how to say this guy's last name. Nate Bargatze.
That was probably wrong.
Bargatze. What did you say? That's probably wrong. That was a very Nathan thing to say. It's on Netflix. Matt said that his wife, her name is Megan. He didn't include that, but I'm just throwing out shout outs left and right.
Okay.
Said they were dying from start to finish. It is hilarious and completely clean. It's also apolitical, which is extremely refreshing nowadays, says Matt. Afterwards, you'll definitely want to go back and watch his 30-minute special on Netflix from the series The Stand-Ups. And just to give one more shout out here, listener Taylor Holan, Taylor, I'm butchering your name, buddy. I'm sorry.
You're not doing great with the names.
I shouldn't have picked this one.
Like, why'd you do this?
But Taylor said Tennessee Kid is so good in all caps.
Awesome.
So yeah, Matt and Megan and Taylor recommend the Tennessee Kid. Reed, I'm going to introduce my what you're watching with a question to you.
Oh,
actually, my friend. And that question is, Reed, what do you say to the god of death?
Not today.
Not today, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Game of Thrones is back. So as of this recording, 3 episodes of Game of Thrones season 8 are out. By the time this airs, we might even be done. Gosh, or at least to 5.
Close to.
So Game of Thrones is back. It took about a year plus hiatus. I think you and I will differ a little bit on this, although that's purely conjecture. There was a moment, I don't know, I'm a little weird in my relationship to Game of Thrones. Okay. I am very much an appreciator of the show. I think from a purely objective standpoint, there is nothing like it on television, and whether in just sort of narrative ambition or scale of production. Mm-hmm. But if there was a moment, I think the moment has passed a little bit for me of having a real deep emotional investment in the show.
Okay.
It is more like, okay, I'm watching this for kind of the cultural water cooler kind of experience. And I mean, there are certainly characters I really still like that are still around the show, but I don't know. Like, I like it. I'm going to finish it. We just are on the heels of the Battle of Winterfell, which is episode 3. We don't have to spoil things necessarily for that, so don't worry about that, listener. But it is a massive technical feat they pull off in that 3rd episode. It is, sort of, again, statistically speaking, quote unquote, the longest battle ever put to film. So there's a lot of technical wizardry on display. I will happily finish it. I will be curious to see exactly how it resolves. I watch it a little bit more as observer than like engager. I don't know. That it makes me a little sad to say that, but it is just kind of where I'm at with it these days. Anyway,
well,
so
what's interesting is, so my only sort of comment to that is, so my wife and I did a massive, this was in spring of last year. We did like a barrel through all 7 seasons. We watched it in the span of a little over a month. And it was after season 7 had concluded, but well before the ramp up to this coming season. So that whole marathon was, I think we'll always recall, some sort of our big discoveries. We came into the show Breaking Bad in a very similar fashion, like binging all of the previous seasons right up before the last one. Game of Thrones was the same thing, and I feel like that big, huge marathon was so impactful and such a big deal. This coming season, I will tell you, like, for me, okay, so if you are, I don't even know that we need to give a spoiler warning for this, because if you are at all watching, if you at all care about Game of Thrones, you're already watching it.
Yeah, that's true.
So, like, at this point, like, what I'm going to say, by the time you get through it, you'll forget it. I will say that, like, this big battle sequence that we just had, the episode previous to that, the Night of the Seven Kingdoms episode, was actually a bigger punch to me emotionally for all the character stuff they did, particularly surrounding Brienne and everything. I mean, like,
yeah, I'm sorry. And to pivot, I want you to continue your thought. All I would say there in my rude interjection is simply characters like Brienne are what keep me emotionally attached.
Sure.
The broader story, I'm a little less kind of invested in. It is some of those really special characters, but please continue.
No, absolutely. Well, and I think I mean, that battle was, I will say that there were still some incredible things about it, some incredible shots. I think my wife and I both gasped several times through the episode of like, man, what in the world is the show putting us through, But I will say that, like, that particular battle, it was a bit underwhelming in the sense that there was so much of it I could not see. I couldn't see what was going on, which effectively rendered the whole, hey, we're fighting at night thing, like that was effective. But I was like, well, yeah, but I mean...
It's funny, I really don't want to camp out on this long, but I've been reflecting since that. I don't know if you know this, but like, so... I watch it by myself at home. My wife doesn't care about it. I don't have any buddies I go hang with on it, despite invites. Yes, I know, Steven, you're the man. But time and just whatever hasn't really permitted. Well, that particular episode, I did get pretty drawn in, and there's a lot of really effective elements to it. But during the watching of it, I was like, man, every half of every 5 minutes, I just can't really discern what's happening on screen other than cacophony. Well, there's a massive response to that. It was almost reassuring once I happened to go, and Game of Thrones is one of those type of shows where I do right after it's over, just kind of go browse Twitter and that sort of stuff, see people's responses. There was a massive outcry about that to the point that it makes me wonder, man, y'all really dimmed the sort of rewatchability of this specific episode because of that. Right. It's, for what is effectively an hour 15 or so episode, where about 40 minutes of it is very watchable and a lot of it is really indiscernible. That's not a good ratio.
No, not at all.
Such that by the now, I will say this: props to the episode, but again, I was so kind of technically my eyes were damaged in the watching of this because I couldn't figure out what was going on. But where the episode ends was a genuine surprise. I mean, I really did not know. Sure. I wasn't even thinking about that, and that was a really great narrative pivot that really elevates a particular character.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally agree. Those few moments when they occur are like that one moment you're talking about, like that big sort of battle finisher at the end. But then also like the two, there were more than two, but the two major deaths were, they were emotionally felt and they were appropriate and they were good. But I was also a little bit like, wow, I was expecting, this is going to sound so bad. I was expecting some bigger players to get taken off the board, and.
Well, for a show that cut its teeth on the Red Wedding, honestly.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess we're in just kind of spoiler territory for Game of Thrones, but like Reed said, if you care at all about Game of Thrones, you're probably watching it. So, and this is about 3 weeks after this episode anyway. I would notch that as a disappointment of that episode. It's like,
sure.
Not only from a technical standpoint was it difficult to watch, from a narrative standpoint, because I don't consider any of the deaths that really happen in that episode as Jorah maybe, but no majors got taken off the board. Yeah. And I actually thought, when the crypt breakout is happening, I thought they should wipe out everyone in there. Again, that sounds like real sadistic. I just mean for a show that in its DNA is doing absolutely what you don't want them to do to their characters. That is how you achieve that.
Right.
And leave the rest of them limping towards the finish line. But literally every major character survived that has been important. So anyway,
and that certainly doesn't guarantee that they will survive the totality of the show.
Well, maybe sure,
but for this, because everything was sort of building up to this, and I felt in a similar way.
Well, brother, I just gotta say that's been another episode of What you watching, what you listening to, what you watching, what you watching, reading, listening, what you watching, what you reading.
I'm just picturing all the little clockwork things as they go.
What you watching, listen to.
Oh my gosh, that's so great.
This is why I don't do these.
No, you did a really great job.
I
thought it was really fantastic. You did a really great job.
Riri, you're a generous co-host. Reed, we are in 19. What did we do last week? Goodness gracious, it's so long ago.
Silver Bullet.
Oh yeah, Silver Bullet with the Young Adventures of Charles Xavier. We are this week dealing with something I had never seen and never thought I would ever get around to seeing.
Really? You never thought you would ever see it?
I just mean I knew nothing about it other than the name. Yeah. I honestly didn't know until you introduced it or submitted it for this series that it was a Stephen King connection.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
It was one of those I was content, not because I knew anything about it. It was one of those I was content to just sort of let life just pass me by. I'm like, I'll never get around to that movie. And here we are talking about it, and I've watched it.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, well, I have, if you'll permit me,
we are talking about Batman and Superman, right?
Oh man. just when you think a thing is like dead and buried in the ground, here comes that old.
Here comes the night. Here comes the Night King.
No, I was thinking, here comes
everybody
that.
Up.
Here comes that thing coming out of the grave, going, "I want my cake," like Batman and Superman.
Yeah,
like,
I want my cake.
No, it's serious.
And there's Judd Crandall in the corner being like, "Sometimes doubt is better."
That's exactly right. Sometimes it is. So, I have a few, can keep them pretty brief, little trivial bits, trivial factoids to run down for you. So this was by no means the first anthology film. I mean, I don't even know how far back the concept of, just a feature-length collection of smaller short stories. The earliest one that I can think of is a film from the 40s called Dead of Night, which is fantastic. But there may even have been one earlier than that. But George Romero, he of Night of the Living Dead fame, and of course Stephen King, they had been personal friends for quite a few years and had been looking for a project to collaborate on. And so the idea of Creepshow kind of came together, and they got it off the ground. There is also a Creepshow 2 that they both were involved in, and I'm personally really very fond of it. It gets a lot of derision for reasons I can't quite understand, because I think it's easily on par tonally with this original Creepshow.
Is it Romero King?
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
And then there's also a Creepshow 3, which I've never seen, and it was from both of these, Creepshow 1 and Creepshow 2, were from early 80s. Creepshow 3 is from the 2000s. I've never seen it, and presumably it's terrible. Presumably it's awful. And it obviously has no involvement from either of them. But the reason I bring that up is because many fans consider the film from 1990 called Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, that they consider that to be the, in air quotes, true Creepshow 3, because it features one of Stephen King's story that was adapted by George Romero in that film. So they're like, okay, well, that one's the real one. The last thing I'll mention about that is just that our wonderful, beloved horror streaming service Shudder is currently in production as of this recording for a new TV season version reboot of Creepshow, which is supposed to premiere later this year. And
do you take? I'm sorry to cut you off. Do you take that to mean that each episode is its own story, thus anthology, or each episode has multiple stories in it?
I'm not sure if each episode will have multiple stories, but if you look it up on IMDb, it is listed as a 9-episode TV season. So gotcha. I would presume each, kind of like a Twilight Zone or a, Outer Limits kind of thing, that it is each episode is just a separate thing. But what's interesting is I know Tom Savini, who worked with George Romero on, Day of the Dead, and legendary makeup effects artist. He did all of the effects work and the creature creation for this film, for Creepshow. I don't know if you would have caught him, because I don't know if you know what he looks like, but he's he's one of the garbage collectors at the end of the film. He makes a small cameo in it.
Yeah, I never would have known that.
But he is actually directing one of the episodes of the upcoming TV show version of it. So they're getting some, and there's a Stephen King story that is being adapted for that TV show version that's never been put to film in any way. So they've got some big pedigree. So yeah, just a couple more things. I'll try to be quick about these so we can get into actual content of the film. This was also simultaneously released as a graphic novel that was, we mentioned last week with Silver Bullet. This was purely coincidental. It was not a plan on my part. We mentioned that Silver Bullet was originally a collaboration for a novelty calendar that was supposed to be written by Stephen King and illustrated by Bernie Wrightson. Bernie Wrightson illustrated the comic book adaptation of Creepshow.
All right, so pause for a second. I should have done my research here, and I'm a negligent host, and I'm sorry. But now, so I know, even the movie references sort of the EC Comics,
yes,
sort of branding. You just mentioned a graphic novel version. Is it an adaptation of this film? Does Creepshow? Is there a Creepshow EC Comics that this is that this was inspired by? In other words, is Creepshow the movie that we're covering its own thing, or was there a Creepshow comic that spawned this, that inspired them to make this movie, and then beget a graphic novel coinciding,
So for my limited understanding of it, I think it is the second, that it is unquestionably inspired by the legendary EC Comics. I do not recall if there was a brand within the EC Comics world that was Creepshow. I think Creepshow was just the title that they've given to this iteration of that. But then this version did spawn the graphic novel, which King wrote the text for, and Bernie writes and illustrates. And it's actually kind of interesting. I think it's out of active print, so you can find it, but you'd probably have to pay a little bit more for it to get it. It is it's got some interesting things in it, though. Like, for instance, one of the things, because this film, before we get too far into it, consists of 5 complete stories with a 6th sort of framing story that bookends those other 5. In the Father's Day story, it gives the reason why, other than him just being a raving jerk, it gives the reason why Aunt Bedelia kills the father. Is that in the graphic novel, it's that he actually perpetrated and hired someone to make it look like an accident and kill her fiance. And so there's like this little bit of like twisted revenge thing.
I thought that was in the movie.
Is that an element of the film? Is it in the movie? Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Do you watch our material?
That's really funny. So what I did was, and maybe it didn't suit me well this time around, I read the book, but as I watched the material, I would read the story and then watch that section of it, then went back to read the story and then watch that section.
It's like you make this harder for yourself sometimes than it has to be.
Or more fun. But then again, yes.
You're like, Netflix Marvel series, I'm going to parse these out in the most tedious way possible.
Wow.
Anyway, I'm just playing.
No, of course, it's fine. It's fine. A couple more brief ones here. Just, of course, I don't know if you caught how many Fog alumni, not Fog, Fear of God, but Fog, the old John Carpenter film, because we got Adrian Barbeau, Hal Holbrook. Yep. Who's the third?
John Carpenter.
No.
Jamie Lee Curtis?
No, the third one. Jamie Lee Curtis is not in Creepshow.
I know. I just don't know who you're going to tell me.
Okay, so the
I'm
third
just
one
naming
is
people in the fog.
The dad in the very beginning, who is the sort of obnoxious, like, be mean to his kid over comic books, is Tom Adkins, and he's the guy that Jamie Lee Curtis that picks up Jamie Lee Curtis, and
he did not age well.
I know, because it's only like
ain't
4 years
nobody
later.
Gonna be like, you pick me up, I sleep with you. Like, no one's happening. No, that's not happening to this guy.
Wow, you're being so mean to poor Tom Adkins.
Or he was a jerk.
He was a real jerk in this movie. He was
a jerk. I've watching this movie, I was like, this is why Reed loves this movie. This is little Riri. This is little Riri. Not that your dad was mean. I don't mean that, but I just mean like,
of course.
Little Riri with his horror stories.
Watching my horror stories that nobody wanted to let me know. Did you catch who that kid is?
No.
It's Stephen King's son. That's Joe Hill. That's Joe Hill right there. Yeah. And it's really funny because I guess on set, like there was a couple of times where he worked, significantly less than some of the other actors on the piece because he only had a couple of scenes, but he's got those bruise marks from where his dad like hit him. And then I guess right after filming one day, Stephen King took him to a drive-thru, and the drive-thru attendant at McDonald's like called the police on him because he's sitting in there with bruise makeup on his face and everything. It was all all cleared up, but yeah, I thought that was a fun story. I've just got 3 brief bits of trivia. Obviously, no, there's a lot in this film. Obviously, Leslie Nielsen and Ted Danson from the Something to Tide You Over are most known for their comedy work, but here they're playing, very serious roles. But on set, Leslie Nielsen had a fart machine that he would notoriously set off.
I love that man.
I know. Rest his soul. He would notoriously like set off the fart machine like seconds before Romero would call actions, so that they would struggle through the scene. And I just thought that was really, really funny. So they had an alternate story, because we'll get to it, but the final of these films, obviously it has a complication to its plotline that might have proved very difficult to film. And so they had prepared, they were like, okay, in case we don't have the budget and can't make it work to film the sequence called They're Creeping Up on You, they had a separate story called The Hitchhiker that was sort of ready to go. They did wind up doing They're Creeping Up on You, starring legendary actor E.G. Marshall. And so The Hitchhiker made it into Creepshow 2. But those cockroaches cost 50 cents a piece. And Nathan, they used 250,000 of them. They were the single most expensive element of the entire film, of the entire production.
That's the biggest waste of money anybody ever spent. Oh my God.
It's so awful. So I don't know how you want to. I don't know how to want to make your way through this. I don't know. I mean,
are you gonna let me talk?
Oh wow. They're creeping up on you, indeed. Oh my gosh, I'm
creeping up on you.
You just threw a bunch of bugs at me. Oh man.
$250,000 worth, or 250,000 of them. So like, I can't do math.
125,000.
Yeah.
It's 125,000. I love how you walked right into that. 250,000.
Oh well.
Half of that is.
I was multiplying. Oh my gosh. Somebody stop me. No wonder you kept talking. I can't talk. Somebody take this microphone away.
Somebody stop me.
Do you want to know what I think about this movie, Reed?
Wow. Yes, I would love to. No, I would love to know what. I'd love to know what.
You know what?
There was a lot of trivia. I thought it was fun.
Initially, I was like, I don't know. This is kind of dumb.
Really?
But then I was like, this ain't so dumb. And then I was like, oh,
oh yes. So articulate.
That was the progression of my experience in this movie. This is so dumb. This ain't so dumb. That's
God.
it.
Yes.
No, like
you're getting. Sorry, it's your turn
Please.
to talk. But getting,
no. I don't want to know
getting your note from me when you watched.
Oh, I'm gonna read that.
Oh
when we get there.
Okay. Okay.
What? Tell me. Okay, we'll get there.
It was just delightful.
I'm sure it was to you. You're welcome. It was horrific to me. But no, I don't know that this is a movie I would like watch again. It doesn't have the same it didn't invoke in me a similar sort of warmth that say Silver Bullet did.
Yeah.
But by late in it, I was kind of won over by the general conceit. Well, it's funny. So I'll track with you sort of my feelings, like that opening one. I don't remember the name of those shorts, but so
the very first one, Father's Day.
Ed Harris, yeah.
Yep.
That one's so kind of jarring, and for someone like me who had never seen the film, I'm kind of trying to get on the wavelength of the whole piece.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, we've got this opening framework, and then this, and then honestly, as kind of folksy, cutesy weirdo as the King one is, I was like, is this super insensitive now? 30 years on, this is not probably a real PC
not a very,
portrayal,
PC, Yeah.
And so I was just having really weird feelings during that one. I was like, oh, Uncle Stevie, you need to back off a little bit. You need to tone it. You need to tone it down.
Oh my gosh.
And that spells vegetation on your junk.
Oh. Oh my gosh. Yes. I have no recovery plan for that. I have no way to pivot out of that.
I love when it just happens. There it is. I don't have that written down. You can't.
Oh.
You can't fabricate that kind of
They're
content.
creeping up on you.
Oh God. Then you go and do that. So no, by the end of it, I was a bit more warm to it. I like the general vibe to it. I like the sort of comic booky panel for different frames, and I really enjoy what is probably the Wrightson inspired animations between. Yeah. So no, I enjoyed it. What I don't know how you want to progress, because this is going to be a little different for me than
sure.
Scares.
Yeah, no, I understand. Well, I figure what we can maybe do is just like just make our way with a very brief synopsis of each of the pieces, and then just if you have a particular comment on it, then you can make it at that point. So it obviously opens with a framework of this, sort of overbearing dad who is not happy about the fact that his son reads horror comic books and is very mean and even smacks his son at one time. He's very overbearing. We'll get to, I guess I should end the framework by saying, like, at the end, because we only pivot to that story at the very beginning and the very end, and at the end, the comic book that the dad threw out, some garbage men are sort of leafing through it, and they're looking at the different ads, and one of the ads was for a voodoo doll, and it says like, oh, somebody already sent off for that one, and that's when it's revealed that the son is sitting up there like with a voodoo doll about to make his dad's day very painful.
I did think of you as that little kid in this horror stories, but I too did
I never
not
did that,
have. What? You enjoyed horror stories?
No. I never ordered a voodoo doll.
Right. Well, it didn't work. I mean, you tried. Let's be honest. I'm just kidding. I too did not have an abusive, overbearing parent, but I did read comics as a young lad, and one of my parents would be like, ask me if I was going to wear comic books to school because that's all I spent my money on. And you know what? I called them last week and I said, $1.2 billion. I'll wear comic books all day long now. I'm just kidding.
It's going somewhere. That's so funny. That's awesome.
Comics are cool now.
Comics are cool.
Anyway, so yeah, good framing device. You want to talk about Father's Day?
Yeah. So
Ed Harris is a young, dancing, strapping lad.
Boy, that dance is weird.
It is. It's a little odd.
It's a little strange. But so Father's Day, basically, just there's presumably this guy he thinks his children are just money grubbing, greedy little vultures, and then he's a very obnoxious, very cruel man, and then one day old Aunt Bedelia has just had enough, again related to him sort of taking out her fiance, and she bludgeons him with an ashtray on Father's Day, and then he kept pounding his cane saying, I want my cake. Well, several years later, she is visiting the grave of said deceased patriarch, and then he just comes traipsing out of the grave.
When cake is on the menu,
he wants that cake. So my only comment about
it wouldn't have worked as much if he was like, I want my quiche. It just would not have. No, it wouldn't. It doesn't have the same kind of ring to it.
Because ain't nobody ever come back from the dead for a quiche. Ain't no quiche that good.
Only on the fear of God can a joke like that make sense.
Oh my gosh!
I come back for some cake, but I'm good.
Quiche?
I don't need no quiche.
I'll stay here.
I mean, it tasted good when I was alive, but I'm not gonna come back for it.
Well, my only comment about this one is, and so I don't know, just so you, Nathan, are aware of sort of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking as we make our way through each of the pieces, like just blend all your likes, dislikes, and scares. So if you have any comment about the piece we're talking about, like just throw it in at that point. My only comment about this one is, why in the world did both the victims, both Ed Harris and Aunt Bedelia, like why in the world did they just sit there while their father's corpse was like doing the stuff? Like when Aunt Bedelia sees him rising out of the grave, like my first thought is like, if that were happening to me, I would have jumped up and run away. But she's just like screaming, sitting there staring at it. Like, what in the world?
Well,
like,
and then you got Ed Harris who just falls and lays there while
it just sits there and watches.
Very slowly falling gravestone, like Silver Bullet could have gotten out of there.
He's sitting there like, he just sits there and watches it. He's like, oh, this is weird.
That was a really odd production choice.
Yeah, I don't know why he just because I figured like if it just one little pivot and then he can look up at it to be like, did I just see that move or whatever? And then it just tumble over. But no, like it pivots and then like he waits an hour and then it like moves a little bit more and then like
he waits an hour.
Yeah. I mean, like he just
I think I'm good right here in this open grave for a bit. I'm just gonna chill.
So
but yeah, that was an odd choice. I mean, I will say I thought the makeup effects for Cake Cake guy.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Mr. Cake was really good, actually.
Oh yeah. No, it's great. There is actually some pretty impressive. Well, again, it's Tom Savini, man. Tom Savini was he was really a very effective makeup designer in general, particularly when he's doing sort of gruesome human effects. So yeah, no, it was very, very good. But then we pivot.
And
go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Yeah. As a possible, I don't know chronologically where this falls in relation to it, but there's a possible Dark Tower reference in Father's Day.
Oh, what was that?
When Cass says of Bedelia that you can set your watch by her. Just made me think that you can set your watch and warrant by it.
Yeah, that's funny. I did not even think about that. And yeah.
I mean, when you got it, you got it.
I actually would need to look up the continuity because I don't even know if he had published The Gunslinger at this point. Because this is early 80s. I don't even know if he'd published The Gunslinger. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know, bro.
I don't know, bro. But that's only one of 5 stories.
We got to get going.
So the second one features Stephen King himself as I don't know about you, the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill. I thought it was very fun watching Stephen King be so bonkers. And
no, he's actually pretty. Yeah, he's pretty convincing in it.
He's a lot of fun. That is the briefest of the stories and arguably the most simple and direct. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty creepy. It's pretty nasty, but it's pretty creepy.
Well, at first I was like, is he turning into Swamp Thing? Is he turning into Jim Carrey Grinch? And then he just...
Is he turning into Jim Carrey Grinch? Pretty soon, man. After that meteor, man, he's going after the Who's.
Growing junk on his junk, and he's like, oh no, not there.
Oh my gosh. It's pretty awful. But yeah, I mean, it's funny. There's not much to say about that. I mean, it's pretty much just like
there really isn't.
Meteor falls in some hick's backyard. He touches the meteor, and then immediately vegetation just starts growing everywhere that the meteor touches, and that's pretty much it. But because anytime that it gets wet or water on it, then it just flourishes and thrives. But speaking of water, moisture. But speaking of water, that brings us to now. I mean, it's hard to kind of rank these. They're all just sort of a jumble, a fun little menagerie. But something to tide you over, the middle piece of this is my favorite one of these.
I thought somehow I missed the title. I thought it was called Sam Malone and Frank Drebin Go to the Beach.
Basically. Again, I'm a big fan of Ted Danson. I've come to very, very much.
He was a handsome fella.
He was a handsome fella. Yeah, I've loved Cheers. Came to it rather late in my life, but have watched every episode and very, very fond of Cheers. Very fond of Leslie Nielsen from the Naked Gun films and all of his comedic satire roles. But as I mentioned earlier, they're playing specifically very straightforward and dramatic roles, and it's kind of fun to see them play against type. I really enjoyed that quite a bit. Plus, I like the concept of this story. Some possessive, very wealthy, man who feels like he's been wronged by his wife having an affair with this guy, and so seeks revenge on them in one of the most gruesome, worst ways possible. He seeks revenge on them by basically burying them up to the neck in sand at the beach, and just waits for the tide to come in. And that's pretty gruesome. But
I mean, he gets some comeuppance.
He gets some comeuppance because after that, and that's what I think I like about that particular story is that part of it is horrendous enough, but then it ends, and that those deaths are just disturbing to think about on their own. But of course, it ends with them returning from their waterlogged demise to basically perpetrate the same thing on him. And his maniacal laugh at the end, I just love. I just love Nielsen, but his maniacal laugh of like, I can hold my breath for a long time, and he's like, madly cackling as the tide starts to come in. It's great. I love that one. That's my favorite one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, I would agree with you there.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. And then
we don't have to keep going.
Oh no, we do because there's 2 more. So then So then the next to last one is also the longest one. It's just called The Crate, and basically
I fell asleep during this one.
Did you? Like for real?
I did. Yeah.
Oh my god! Because
I had to go back.
And it is long, And it's funny, too, because it is the lengthiest of the piece, but it's still pretty, straightforward. But it sets up a lot of different things. I mean, basically, this at this university, a janitor, a night watchman, I forget if he's a custodian or if he's a night watchman, but he stumbles across this crate that says it's from, like, the late 1800s. And when he calls in one of the professors to examine it, they open the thing up, and it has got some prehistoric monster in it of some sort of, like, werewolf / fang-toothed gorilla-looking thing. And I will say that of all the effects that are in this, that is easily like the cheesiest and silliest. But cheesy looking as that monster is, the moment when... Oh, and I should mention that, like, simultaneous to all of that, the character of Hal Holbrook, who we mentioned earlier, he's not the character, that's the actor. He's married to Adrienne Barbeau, who is a very, very cruel and very... she's constantly degrading him and commenting on him, making him feel stupid and putting him down. Well, he's desperate and fantasizes about ways he will basically get rid of her and do away with her. So when he finds out about this monster hiding in the crate, he sees his opportunity. And so anyway, so that's basically the thrust of this whole story. But the moment when, after he's effectively sort of submitted her to the monster and gotten rid of her, when he's replacing the lock, that's really, I don't know, maybe you were asleep by then, but but that whole sequence was just nerve-wracking for me, where he's trying to, like, replace the lock, and then the monster just, like, lunges for him, doesn't get him, but that was a pretty effective, as far as jump scares go. That was a pretty effective one.
Hey, I just happened to look down my notes here, and I don't know if you caught this, but there's a fun little, like, cross-story pollination. Did you notice that Frank Drebin has the same Buddha ashtray that's in the Ed Harris story?
That ashtray is in every single one.
I figured that's probably the case. I specifically saw it there, but once I saw it in the beach one, I was like, I bet that's in all of them.
Yeah.
I just didn't.
Yeah, yes, good eye on you, because it's also in Jordy Verrill's kitchen. And it is also, I forget where it is in the crate. I think it's in the professor's office, like where they do most of their sort of little conversation. I think it's there. And then I forget, because it really does, I don't know if it's in the last one, because it would look, I mean, it is there somewhere, because I know it's intentionally in all of them, but I can't remember where it would be, because his apartment is so specific.
Sparse.
Yeah. But it might just be like on the kitchen counter or something like that. But why don't you tell us about that final piece in Creepshow? Why don't you tell us about that one, Nathan? Because let me set you up for it. Because I knew you were watching this movie. I knew you were watching it.
This I mentioned falling asleep. This should illustrate your story here. That's why that happened.
Oh yes, because I knew you were watching this, and you had commented on Father's Day. And then I commented on the
one night.
Yes, it was a night.
Yeah,
it was at night.
Right.
And you commented on the Father's Day thing, sent me a text which clued me in that you were watching it, and I was just waiting. Like, I commented on the crate one, and then I never heard from you, and I was like, oh man,
that's because I fell asleep.
And I'm like, he's gonna let me have it, and I was like, and I almost texted you like, did you finish it? Did you finish? But I was like, no, I'm gonna wait. I'm sure he's talking to. So, but because I knew about this final one, and I knew about your aversion to this particular phobia. So yeah, why don't you tell us about this last one?
Well, but the punchline there is, I went to bed just, totally oblivious to the fact that my best friend, like, freaking set me up. Like lay the bear trap like in Silver Bullet, and you go to open the bear trap and then just release it again on my leg.
Oh my gosh.
That's a deep cut. We didn't even reference that scene in that movie. But anyway, so yeah, I doze off during the crate. I barely make it to the end of it, and I'm like, oh, I'm tired. There's no, like, 20 minutes left in this movie. I'm going to bed. So I go to bed, not knowing I've left you and waiting. And then the next night, or the next day, I think, because there's only a little bit left. I texted you the screenshot of my notes.
Yeah, your notes are like a progression of madness, like just continuing to devolve. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's so great.
If you aren't going to watch this movie, I don't blame you for this ending part specifically, but the premise is just this, I don't know, gosh, meant to be this Howard Hughes-esque to the extreme,
secluded himself in his penthouse apartment kind of thing. Yeah.
But it's this real Spartan place, and very hard edges and blank surfaces everywhere. And, he wipes a Kleenex or something and then puts it down this pneumatic tube that sucks it out into the wherever. But anyway, early in it, sees one cockroach, and then, of course, just the nature of this stupid story. Is it called Bugs?
No, it's called They're Creeping Up on You.
Oh, yeah, you've said that a couple times. I see is bugs, though. But, by the end of it, there's $125,000 worth of stupid roaches. Like, why? Good gosh. That, and ultimately, it doesn't really establish it as they're a mental fabrication, but it doesn't really, does it definitively state what happens to him? It just, he has an aneurysm or something? I don't know.
No, it doesn't definitively state, like honestly, if you were to take the film as its literal value, like death by bug is like is what he has.
Right. But then all of a sudden they're nowhere to be found. I don't know. I perceived it as more of a terrible vision he's having throughout it, but I could be wrong. I was myself having a terrible vision, so I don't know.
No, that's Nathan. That's you coping with this story. That's your.
That'd be amazing if I started describing this really flowery ending to it, and you're like, "What are you talking about? That's not even in the film whatsoever." It's like, no, it's like in The Descent.
I'll remind you of what happens at the end when you're done.
Oh no, I know. So yeah, this idiot character sees all these roaches compounding and accumulating over the course of these 20 minutes until finally he goes into his room, and I might vomit right now. He goes into his room,
like a safe room.
Yeah, his safe room is, it's got a safe room, and then under his bed's sheet, there's all this bulbous activity happening. He pulls it back, and there's bajillion cockroaches, and then he falls over, and then they burst out of his body, and he's like Spider-Man in The Mist.
Gosh.
It's repulsive. It's abominable. So anyway, I'm gonna give us a little story time here and read my notes, and you could cue up this next minute as your commentary track on this episode. This They're Coming to Get You, or whatever it's called. It says, "That nasty ass roach on that man's hand. That ain't right." Next note. "Them roaches in that man's Dharma brand oats. That ain't right." He's got to have the Lost reference in there. Next line. Them roaches. I did type that out. That's not me embellishing. It says, "Them roaches all up in that man's lights and coming through that man's vents. That ain't right." Just two more. The next one. The next one says, "Them cockroaches all over that man's house and all his everything and in his bed. That motherfucking shit ain't right." Important note. It says mother buggin', B-U-G-G.
Oh,
okay.
My gosh.
Very last note. Once chest burster starts happening, this last note, you've got to envision like 1,000 H's. Pretend I spent $125,000 on 50 cents each worth of H's, and it just says, "Ah."
And then what you did was you just screenshot your notes, those notes. I did not get any prep for it. I did not. It was just like a surprise in the middle of my day. All of a sudden, you just text me those notes. Oh man, it was glorious. It was so awesome. And I texted you back. I was like, I was waiting to hear, and I thought you were just saving it all for the episode.
Nope.
Oh my gosh, that was so funny. Oh man. Yeah, that's pretty nightmarish. It's pretty awful. Yeah, man. Old E.G. Marshall. Well, and he says in the episode, he's the one who says like they creep up on you, but he's talking about all these people who work for him,
right,
as like bugs, as like brainless, little peons. So it's funny because I really thought this, I mean, if memory serves, unless you count the couple of times that we've covered TV series for, hashtag TV Guidepost or something, we've never covered an actual like anthology film where within the course of the feature there are multiple disconnected stories. And so I was really trying to hone down and think like, okay, well, what, how do we approach theme? Do we hone in on one and kind of talk about that, or exactly what do we do? And so for one of the things that I found interesting, it doesn't line up completely lockstep all through it, but I feel like it's pretty there, and it's hard for me to know if this is just the fortunate coincidence of the nature of all of these stories, or if it was something intentional on King's part in developing this. But the themes of greed and payback show up in like every single one of these pieces. Some degree of either greed or payback or both. In the opening, the framing device, you've got, the whole thing is he's ordered the voodoo doll and he's going to pay his dad back for, taking his comics and throwing it away. The theme of greed shows up much more prominently in stories like Father's Day, where he's like, he's like, all you want is just my money.
My quiche.
And then even in The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, he wants to collect this meteor rather than leave it alone because he wants to, I can finally pay off that bank loan, that $200 bank loan. And so, like, that's what he wants. In Something to Tide You Over, it's not, obviously, there's an affair at the center of it, but Leslie Nielsen's character specifically says this is about sort of possessiveness for him, because he's like, hey, why don't she, she just wants out. But he's basically like, no, what's mine is mine. And so that level of sort of possession, particularly regarding a human being. And then we get back to of course, the theme of payback shows up prominently in both directions in Something to Tide You Over. And then in The Crate, it's a huge element of the story between Hal Holbrook and Adrienne Barbeau, just of this whole notion of feeling so degraded for so long, and so he issues a payback, a revenge there. But the themes, particularly where they most stood out for me, of like this conversation between greed and vengeance, payback, retribution, whatever you want to call it, was in They're Creeping Up on You, because we're not giving too many details about what the aggrieved woman who calls him and is like, you killed my husband, and obviously he didn't like physically murder him, but something has happened because of the miser's dehumanizing of his workers and the cold-hearted way in which he basically treats his people as simply commodities. And so she issues this pained declaration of like, I hope you die. She cites a couple of ways she would feel good if he did. And so she's basically, like I hope you die. And that's when, and his viewing of the people beneath him or beneath his station just being like, they're nothing but bugs. They're nothing but just little worthless creatures to him. And then that being ultimately what literally eats him alive from the inside out is just it's pretty gruesome. But it was this, as I was thinking about it, and obviously it's not a very complex film. It doesn't feel like it's really, trying very hard to say anything profound, if anything at all. But this idea of retribution, and particularly this idea of the pursuits of material gain, or the pursuits of some sort of materialism, as it were, material need, culminating in a otherworldly vengeance. I just found that really interesting. That each of the stories, without stretching too much, like I said, it doesn't line up completely lockstep, but without stretching too much, there is something of retribution and payback and or greed and consequence in each of the. There are 5 core stories. If you count the framing story, it's 6. But in each of them, they have, some sort of iteration of that kind of thing. And obviously, horror has the options and possibilities to really dig deep into the extreme versions of payback and, again, the consequences for somebody being too selfish and greedy and materialistic. But in a film that is clearly meant to just be sort of a fright fest, a little, gruesome, grisly little horror tales. I just found that interesting. I just found it interesting that they each deal with some sort of payback. It's like they all deal with payback except for the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill, unless you count, payback from the meteor. And they all deal with greed except for directly the crate. The crate doesn't really have a lot to do with like monetary greed, but they're all connected by one or the other of those particular things.
Well, and I think you're also dialing in on, like, from a sort of story construction standpoint, very basic human emotion, greed, envy, and then why the anthology sort of format works is, okay, how do you tell at least a mildly impactful kind of human story in a very short span of time? And it's dialing in real specifically on a very specific emotion and playing out a horror kind of conceit around it. And honestly, this is sort of dipping or swimming back up to the surface a little bit from thematics. This is why I'd be a little unsure about a full-length episode anthology series, just because I think the fun and value of Creepshow the movie is in these little, you're skimming a rock across the surface and just sort of getting a little 10, 15, at most 20-minute-ish glimpse into these little human dramas that are tinged with a supernatural or otherworldly kind of horrific vibe to them. And I think that's what's really compelling ultimately about this film.
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, I mean, it's like that's part of the advantage that anthology stories have, is they don't really, well, and I would think this is kind of true of even just like short stories in general, although we've covered short stories and devoted an entire episode to them. The Monkey's Paw, The Lottery, The Raven. I would even throw Eminem's Stan in there in terms of this kind of thing.
Do you know how this phenomenon that happens in life sometimes, where you're like, you discover a thing and then all of a sudden you see it everywhere?
Oh yeah.
Like dozens to many dozens, multi-dozens.
Multi-dozens.
To say 100 might be a stretch, but so many places I see the appropriation of the word stan in relation to obsessing over a thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, constantly.
Yeah,
I see it all over the place, and I never even knew that was a thing until we did that episode. So anyway, random. Sorry.
That's so funny. No.
Fear of God, memory lane.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that is and we don't have to spend a tremendous amount of time on this. I don't know that the material necessarily warrants it, but that's the advantage of it. The advantage of it is it is, it's a snack. It's a narrative snack, as it were.
I do like snacks, like cake. Or quiche.
But
parfait.
Yes, I like a good parfait. So, but yeah, I mean, that is what these anthology models sort of afford, is the opportunity to, hey, we're gonna dive into an extreme sort of frightful scenario in relative brief succession. There's not a lot of opportunity to really mine the depths of a particular thing.
I'm sorry to just randomly jump in.
No, you're okay.
A Frank Drebin fart machine, but really, I think there's more a story of vengeance present in all of these.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Of course, the father, and then even the sort of supernatural aspect, or the extreme natural aspect of the meteor's vengeance for being disturbed. And it reminds me so much, and gosh, I could not tell you the names of these books, but maybe post Initial Pet Sematary for me, or circa that era of my life. I'm going to reference R.L. Stine, but it wasn't all purely him. I did read a lot of R.L. Stine, but these little like horror stories for kids type books and collections and stuff that were all about like the what happens when you tamper with relationships and, nature. It wreaks its vengeance upon you in whatever horrific fashion. Anyway, it really calls to mind those kind of tales that, again, I couldn't tell you names of, but
sure,
are locked away in my subconscious.
And that's kind of, horror at one of its most fundamental types of stories is the otherworldly vengeance story. Like it goes all the way back to Pandora's box. It like, I don't know, getting all the way back to stories that are older than recorded time itself, but one of the earliest is just Pandora's box. She opens it up and suddenly all these evils just sort of unleash. And so I think that's why stories of like dire, dreadful consequence, sometimes even on minute little choices, is fascinating, and is something that the horror genre is probably most equipped to really deal with in a way that structures it around understandable paradigms, in ways that we can approach the subject of consequence and vengeance again in manners that would basically afford us an opportunity to contextualize them and say, because we do tend to navigate our world, I think, even if we are vaguely or loosely aware of the potential consequences for the choices that we make, we are certainly ill-prepared or ill-equipped to deal with them, particularly if they are dreadful in any extremity. And so because of that, again, horror stories like this, little smaller tales of gruesome vengeance, give us some sort of ability to rehearse that, as weird as that word may sound. Like, it gives us an opportunity to sort of, step into the middle of some of those extremes. And I don't know, I find that immensely fascinating. Obviously the scriptures are rife with consequences of vengeance, consequences of taking vengeance for yourself. Scriptures obviously say, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, so encouraging us against vengeance and towards reconciliation. But this is almost more of the type of, and this is why I think Something to Tide You Over is my favorite, is because it is this never-ending cycle of revenge. Like, he's taking vengeance on them for how they've wronged him, and then because of the extremity of his vengeance, they come back from the grave to exact vengeance upon him. And again, that's it's this potentially never-ending cycle, and I find that really compelling and really fascinating. And again, it's not meant to be some deep, thought-provoking thing, but it is also it's there. It's apparent in the text. I'm not stretching at all to, that cycle of vengeance is obvious. And yeah, I don't know how much more there is to particularly say about that, other than the fact that I do think, as fun or as silly or as extreme as a movie like Creepshow would be, I think you could understandably walk away with a bit of a recognition of, like, there's monsters on the other side of vengeance. Like, whatever it is, it is that you've been wronged for, whatever it is that you've done or has been done to you, like vengeance unleashes monsters. And I think that is something that we neglect and forget sometimes in our navigation of the ways people have transgressed against us, and the ways that we're trying to cope with, even accidental wrongs or things that have been somewhat less intentional. But yeah, it's for myself, although I've talked a lot, and I would certainly invite it if you have it, though no pressure. For me, it sort of ends with, vengeance releases monsters. They're creeping up on you.
Ugh. I don't really have any real substantive stuff to say, other than just, I guess I will not send off now for this voodoo doll after you've said all that. It feels a little like maybe I should just tear up this coupon, but I don't know. I was really excited for a minute.
little demon coupon. Oh my gosh. Well, do you want to go ahead and pivot then into the fog meter for it?
Let's do it. Let's go to the fog meter.
Why don't
for
you tell
George
the
Romero and Stephen King's Creepshow. The fog meter is our handy metric we use here on The Fear of God. Get it? Fear of God, fog. Wherein we utilize a 1 to 10 numeric metric to measure the fear quotient of a film, how scary it is, and the God quotient of a film, how substantive we find its sort of material. In terms of, if you don't mind if I start, in terms of
Go right ahead. Yeah.
Sort of fear quotient, they're creeping up on you is probably, it's enough. It's enough. Like, I really didn't find much of any of the other stuff that quote unquote scary. That's pretty wretched and might warrant a 6 for me from scare quotient.
All right. You know, it's funny because I've really been thinking a lot recently about like how we measure the sort of fear factor, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in specifically like what scares us or how quote unquote scary it is. I mean, just in terms of sheer gruesomeness and everything like that, I'm going to surprise you. I'm actually going to give Creepshow an 8 for its fear factor. Yeah, but here's the thing. It's like I'm not necessarily saying that it's going to give you, 8 out of 10 nightmares. It's just like there's a gruesomeness. There's a perpetual fright factor in it, perhaps because it's so, nugget-based and compartmentalized. So I'm going to give it an 8 for that. For me, on the substance measurement, I mean, again, I've said a couple of times, even in our exploring of the themes, that it's not really very hard trying to be terribly substantive, but I do think it has a couple of on-the-nose things to say, and for that, I'm going to give it a 4 for its substance measurement. It's God measurement, if you will.
I was ready to rank this film pretty low on both measures, not because it's like garbage, I don't mean that, but just, it didn't like quote-unquote scare me and that sort of thing, but I do really like the thread you pulled out of, vengeance. I'd like to think that I introduced the vengeance thing real articulately, and then you took it to the next level and just like revealed its full potency and inherent in the medium.
I'll take that.
Yeah. Well, we work well together.
We're a good team.
Yeah. Like Avengers. This is a good team. I think that I will probably settle on a 5 because, again, I don't know that the movie is really wanting to ponder this and invite you to think about it, although I could be wrong, as much as it is presenting these notions. But nonetheless, I really like that thematic aspect.
Yeah, that's understandable. I would agree with you that I feel like we would be remiss, even though pulling some things that I think are genuinely there. I think it must go on record that there's very little intention behind a film like Creepshow other than just to, we hope you had fun, we hope you got scared. That's really sort of the substance of it. But we do give it a 5.75 out of 10.
Okay, now we're in quarter points.
Oh yes, indeed. When they land that firmly, then you just have to call it out. 5.75 out of 10 on the fog meter. But let's get to the most pertinent question, Nathan. Would you, in general, recommend Creepshow? Be honest.
I don't know. I mean, which I know. I guess I'm supposed to pick one or the other. Probably not, which sounds like I'm crapping on it. I don't mean that per se. I just it wasn't like this rip-roaring good time. I do like a lot of its conventionality or, the conventions that it's working with. But, and I don't know. I like the anthology sort of setup. I like the production style. I wouldn't, I'll just to be a little different, I'm going to say no.
All right. Yeah, no, that's fair. My recommendation is going to have a little bit of an asterisk on it. I like to do that. I think that if you are a fan of like the old school sort of Tales from the Crypt idea, if you're a fan of like the old EC comics or the sort of gruesome short horror tales, I think Creepshow is pretty essential, but I don't think the casual fan of, horror films as a whole will find it terribly necessary. I think as far as like if you're a fan of that sort of thing, of the gnarlier, more gruesome elements, gorier kind of thing, then by all means, you should seek out Creepshow. But if that's not really your thing, if you like more psychological, or if you like a little subtler, or if you like a longer, broader, substantive arc, then you may not enjoy Creepshow as much. So that's my little recommendation.
Very diplomatic sort of response there.
It's pretty diplomatic.
If you think you're going to like it, I would recommend it to you. But if you're not sure that you'll like it, I would recommend not watching it.
Then I don't know about that. So there's that with it.
Welcome to the very first food episode of The Fear of God, everyone.
On the menu today, we are serving some birthday cake and some meteor, and we are serving some...
What? What'd you say?
You heard me. You remember when he's sitting there, like he pokes the meteor, and then like, ew, like it runs over his hands. And
yeah.
Yeah. So
does he say that there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good callback, Riri.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Okay, so next week we are going to be concluding this little mini run, not concluding the year long. Yeah, not concluding the year-long run, but we're going to be concluding this little mini run with something pivoting away from the 80s and pivoting back into the 2000s. So we are going to be covering next week the, I think, not to tip everybody's hand, but I think a pretty stellar adaptation of a short story from Everything's Eventual by Stephen King. Seek out the film. I apologize, I do not have the director in front of me, but it's the film starring Samuel L. Jackson and John Cusack called 1408. Seek out that film where you can, and we will see you right here next week for 1408, starring John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. Nathan, thank you so much for enduring Creepshow and for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my friend. We will see you all next week.
Bye. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. You can continue this conversation in a variety of ways. On Twitter, @TheFearOfGod. On Instagram, @FearOfGodPodcast. You can like or follow us on Facebook or join the Fear of God Facebook discussion group. You can follow Reed on Twitter @ReedLackey and Nathan @TheNathanRouse. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com or visit morethanonelesson.com to comment on the official episode posts. And lastly, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.